Now, just to give you a few words about Blake. So basically, we met only 2 or 3 months ago. He comes from LA. He has an entrepreneurial background. He used to run his own startup doing microcredits in Rwanda. But also, he worked in France for an amazing entrepreneur, an Harvard teacher. Harvard or Stanford? Harvard, yeah. And this guy, like also a big researcher who created a brand new innovation, something you've never seen before. It's like a hardware, a machine, and you put your finger on it and you get a special flavor. Aroma. The aroma you want. Crazy. So this guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to raise funds for things that are impossible and to educate a brand new market. So please giving a lot of love by welcoming him.
Thank you, Alice. So we're here today to talk about new markets. Who among you are entrepreneurs? Pretty much everybody. And whether you're facing like a new market or an established market, who's facing a new market? I guess that's why you're here, right? So that's good. So today the overview of this talk, just quickly, is we can separate it into 2 parts. The first is more theoretical, and I'm going to give you some frameworks to kind of think about innovation from a macro perspective. And then we'll walk through some case studies that I think are helpful in illustrating some of the points I want to make. The takeaways that I want you to have today are 3 things. First, I want you to be able to see some of these failure and success patterns from kind of a macro over-level view of the market. Secondly, I want to give you the opportunity to be introspective and to look and see which of these patterns you may see in yourself or in your own startups. And then third, I want you to be able to use the framework that I'm going to give you today to guide you in your decision making as you, every day when you show up to work, you have to figure out what are the tactics that I'm actually going to use today and as I'm making my business decisions. And hopefully the last framework that I leave you with will be helpful in doing that. So let's start off with some definitions. And some of these terms are often thrown around, even in business circles, very frequently, interchangeably, but they actually mean very different things. So first of all, what is an industry? An industry is a group of firms, it's a group of companies that are all, they all are defined by having a common organizational capability, you could say. So the auto industry, you've got Fiat and Chrysler and Mercedes, they all make cars. That's their defining characteristic, and that's why we talk about the auto industry. Now, what is demand? Well, demand is made up of 2 things. Demand is made up of need from a market and willingness to pay. So those are 2 things that are really important to remember, and we'll get into that more later. And what is a market? A market is simply aggregated demand. It's a group of customers that are united by a common need and by a common willingness to pay. A new market, sometimes called a nascent market, has a couple of distinct characteristics. Basically, it's a market that is newly formed, and it's one where there's no dominant player. But you all know this because you're probably startups working in new markets, right? So this is really important to remember because a lot of people will talk about industries and markets and they'll switch these around, but industries, you have to remember that markets are made up of people, essentially. And when you're talking about industries, you're thinking generally from a firm-centric point of view, and you don't want to be doing that as an entrepreneur. You want to be thinking from a market-centered point of view. So why do new markets form? Typically, they form for 2 reasons. There's some kind of a shift in what is being sold and who is buying. So what can drive a shift in what is being sold? Well, it could be technological advances, maybe a new scientific discovery. It could be a new way of recombining existing technologies. And then in terms of who is buying, or who you're selling to as a firm, you could be selling to new people in new markets, you could be selling at a different price point, or you could be selling using a new model to existing people at a similar price. So this is essentially product market fit, but this is a deeper analysis on product market fit. So as I said, let's dive as a level deeper into demand and analyze demand a little bit. So we said demand is composed of two things. It's composed of a need and it's composed of willingness to pay. So your job as entrepreneurs is to ask yourself this question: have I identified a group of people that have a common need and a common willingness to pay, and they're willing to pay me and my firm to meet that need? So these two questions are really important to you. Has the market clearly stated its need, and do I understand it? And how much is the market willing to pay? Now, in terms of introspection, I'd like all of you to take a second and look at this continuum from 0% to 100%, and think about where you lie on this continuum. So the question that I asked about how certain are you that you've identified a common problem and a common willingness to pay, and then place yourself on this continuum and figure out, are you more pushing into a market or are you more being pulled into a market? And be really honest with yourself, because we all as entrepreneurs suffer from confirmation bias. Obviously, we wouldn't have started our companies and gone out and trying to bring a product to a market if we weren't passionate about what it is that we're doing. But you need to be really honest with yourself. Is this something that you're passionate about, or is this something that the market is actually calling out for and saying that it desperately needs? So I'm not going to take credit for this. This is IDEO that developed this innovation matrix, and this is very helpful for an individual firm that's constrained by its own organizational capabilities as it's trying to decide how it should innovate or ways that it can grow. And this is actually Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, that came up with this. So if you look at a big company that has several products and product lines, you can look at the existing offerings of that firm and the existing users of that firm. And if they want to innovate in that space, it's basically just managing their existing products and their existing users. And they can do that by modifying prices or by trying to capture more market share, but that's not really real innovation, right? They could also try to offer something new, a new type of product to their existing users by extending their product lines. They could also try to adapt their current products to new users by selling in new markets. Or they could do something revolutionary and try to create a new product that addresses a new market. Now, by default, since startups typically, company boundaries and product boundaries overlap in startups, all of you by default are up here in the revolutionary space, right? So let's take this another level deeper and look in the revolutionary space. So I asked you all to determine where you lie on the push versus pull continuum. And you all know that you're pushing potentially into a new market, or some of you may be talking about innovating in an established market. And I've got some examples that I'd like to go through with you here of firms when they came to the market, where did they lie on this continuum? So in general, you see this trend line going from 0 up to the upper right there. So typically startups that are being pulled into an existing market are building something that's better, faster, cheaper. It's just materially better than everything else that's out there on the market. And startups that are doing something that's completely new and innovative and revolutionary, you could say that they're doing something that's like a brave new world. No one really, they're kind of, in English we say they're skating toward the puck, or where the puck is going, rather than where the puck is now. We love sports metaphors in English, if you haven't noticed that. So first, let's talk about Rocket Internet. So here, for the rest of these slides, you'll see the two elements of demand, the need in the market and the amount that customers are willing to pay. So Rocket Internet, as you all know, is famous for cloning ideas that work, tech ideas that work in one place, and doing them better and winning on execution. So essentially, before they attack a new market, they know that the need is there, and they know that customers are willing to pay. So why does Rocket Internet win? It's because they're able to execute better than everyone else in the market. So Mark Samwer, the co-founder of Rocket Internet, says, we also innovate, we improve the ideas, we make the businesses better because we localize them. And that fanatical attention to what customers want in specific markets is what sets Rocket Internet apart from its competitors. So Nest is interesting. I'm sure you've all heard of Nest, the connected thermostat company. So they validated the fact that people need thermostats. We all have thermostats in our home. But what they didn't know going into this market was, are people willing to pay $250 for a thermostat? No one knew, because there weren't any thermostats on the market that were that expensive at the time. So what did they do? They just made a very conscious decision that they were going to focus on the product. And I'll let Matt Rogers tell the rest of the story here.
It's good to have a grand vision in this huge roadmap of things you want to do. But it's good to start with something really, really concrete, discrete, and that alone could be a business. So that's what we pitched. We pitched the idea of, let's go build a company based on thermostats.
Sounds exciting, right? Thermostats. I'm glad he's passionate about that. Okay, so Slack is kind of the opposite of Nest. So they had validated the fact that people were willing to pay for messaging products. You all know what Slack is? Yes, nod your heads, yes. Fantastic. So yeah, they knew that people were willing to pay for messaging products. What they didn't know was, do people need a new type of messaging product? Back when Slack was launched, we already had lots of messaging products, but did we need a new thing? So what I love about this story is that when Slack was launched, they weren't actually building Slack. I don't know if you knew this, but they were building a massively multiplayer online game. So they had a distributed team. There were guys in Canada, there were guys in New York, there were guys in San Francisco, and they were all working on this, and they were using a system called Internet Relay Chat to communicate. But it was horrible. It was built like 10 or 15 years ago, and they were coming up with problems in the system to communicate all the time. So kind of on the side, they started hacking into the system and making small and incremental changes. And I'll let Stuart Butterfield tell the rest of the story.
And then over the course of 3.5 years working in the game, we got up to about 45 people. And every time one of our internal communication problems got to the point where we just couldn't stand it anymore, we would spend the minimum number of minutes addressing that and then move on and slowly iterate. So we didn't know it at the time, and it wasn't obvious, and this wasn't even obvious, I think, until like a year ago. In this very non-self-conscious, non-speculative way, we were designing Slack, but based on the actual needs that we had as a team. This is, kind of the good news and the bad news is after a couple of years, we have some insight into why it was successful. The bad news is that that's a hard thing to replicate, to be able to actually design something while not actively thinking about it. But it's definitely the best way, because I think one of the biggest problems that software designers, product managers, entrepreneurs have is the temptation to be really speculative with what some hypothetical person would want, as opposed to something that you need.
So good example of being pulled into a new market, and what's interesting about the Slack example is they were the market, right? They pulled themselves into this new market and then just kind of haphazardly figured out, hey, we're building something that could be useful to a lot of different people. As he says here, this is not usually the way that new ideas come about, because you're usually not building something unintentionally. You're usually being very intentional about what you're building. But it's still a good takeaway down here at the bottom, where he mentions that we all need to resist the temptation to be speculative about what hypothetical users may want and focus on what we know users need, right? That's good advice for everybody. So Apple. So the Apple II was billed as the world's first mass market personal computer. And I like this example because when you think about the PC and the way that the Apple II was marketed, customers had never actually been asked to pay for this before by any company. So before computers existed, if you wanted to do word processing or whatever, you got out a pad of paper and a pencil. You didn't have to go spend thousands of your own dollars to go out and buy some kind of a tool that allowed you to be more productive. So in that sense, the Apple computer was very revolutionary, because it was an entirely new category of wallet share for customers. And now we get to talk about, so Alice briefly mentioned Vapor Communications, which is the innovative startup that I was a part of here in Paris that's building connected aromatic communications devices. So just like the Apple II, this is a completely new idea. It's a completely new category of ideas. Very difficult to validate whether people need this or how much they're willing to pay for this when it's completely new and there's nothing to compare it with that's on the market. So this is what our device looked like. It's called the O phone, O for olfactory. And essentially, you'd lift that tray up that's right in the middle, and if you were to do that, you would see 8 cylindrical cartridges, each of which contain 4 individual aromas. And this device, when it would mix those aromas, it had 32 base pairs of aromas. It could come up with or recreate 300,000 unique aromas. So this is a big innovation, right? This came out of a lab at Harvard. It was this scientist and one of his students that came up with a way to miniaturize scent and put it into a device like this. But this was essentially a product that was searching for a market. And actually, I can take that one step further. It was a problem, or it was a solution that was searching for a market, and it was a solution that was searching for a need, even more than that. Really cool capability, but what real consumer need does this solve, right? So I thought I'd take the liberty of showing you our launch video, which funnily enough, I stood on this very stage to launch this product about 2 years ago. So it's funny to be back here now showing you all this. But yeah, so enjoy the O-Phone launch video, and you'll get a great example of a product that is searching for a market and a need.
What is the smell of a grilled cheese sandwich? It's hard to describe, isn't it? Sometimes all we need is a reminder from the other senses. I can say to you that this coffee has notes of chocolate, almond butter, and strawberry jam, and you get a pretty good idea of what I mean. But no way of evoking a scent can produce the emotion of perceiving the scent itself. Biologically, we respond to an aroma in a powerful way that is very unlike how we respond to words, images, and sounds. The word croissant may grab my attention, but smelling one makes me hungry. Introducing O-Phone. O-Phone is like a phone for aroma. It works with a mobile messaging app that lets you take a picture, tag it with over 300,000 possibilities, and send it as an O-Note to friends. When you receive an O-Note, you play it on the O-Phone like this. The question is, how does all this work? Let me tell you a story of 2 friends. Lucien lives here in Paris. Laura lives in LA. They share a passion for the senses. Like sensory pen pals, they communicate by sharing their latest sensory conquest, mostly food and drink. The object is for Lucien to share his coffee experience with Laura. So he snaps a picture with O-Snap, and that's just for starters. Then he does what any good taster will do. He breaks the aroma into its primary and secondary notes, which he selects on O-Snap. And thousands of miles away, the O-Note appears instantly on Laura's O-Phone. Now, Laura can respond with an O-Note of her own. Instead of just talking about sensory experiences from long distances, we can actually share them. And the conversation goes on and on in endless combinations of delicious flavors and unforgettable notes. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, a scent is worth 1,000 pictures. Scent-based mobile messaging with O-Phone. Imagine what we can share.
So a key question to ask that all of you could be asking yourselves is, what are you working on? Have you identified a market that's searching for a problem, or have you identified a problem that is searching for a market? And honestly, when you're starting with a technology like we did here, it's really tough to answer that question, actually. So the best way that you can do is kind of make a few hypotheses about who might be interested in this type of product and try to validate them really quickly. The reason that we focused on food and drink is we saw our technology as complementing communication online about aroma. When we did a search of the way that people were communicating online about aroma, we found that most of the time people were communicating about food and drink, and we said, okay, well, that sounds like a thing that we can focus on. The problem is, I don't know about you, but I've probably never been at home sitting there wishing that I could send the smell of my grilled cheese sandwich to someone. But you only know, and you don't know until you try. That's the thing. And with a product like this, we did several pivots, and they've recently moved back to Harvard to work on furthering the engineering of the device. And I recently was in touch with some of the guys there, and they said that they're focusing on medical devices now. So obviously a totally different thing than what this was, but you, like I said, you only know when you try. So this is kind of funny. So we did raise money in Silicon Valley and in Cambridge, Massachusetts for the O-Phone. I and my team pitched directly to Mark Andreessen, and I'll let you guess whether or not Mark Andreessen invested in our company based on what he says here. But really smart guy, highly recommend everything that he writes. So again, back to you, introspection. I promised you introspection. So where do you lie on this continuum, push versus pull? All right, so another thing I really want to talk about is it's not enough just to launch and find traction in a new market. You really want to be gaining competitive advantage, right? So competitive advantage or monopoly is kind of a simpler way to say that. So this next part of the presentation is really all about tactics that you can use to capture market share and to retain it. It's based on the results of a paper that was written by a Stanford and INSEAD professor. So I've kind of taken the academic boringness out of it and tried to make it a little more relatable here. So forgive my Claude Francois, but so the framework of this paper is all about claim, demarcate, control. So instead of claiming, I've said fake it till you make it. So essentially when you're launching into a new market, you want to be using metaphors, you want to be signaling leadership, you want to construct your identity in a way that users can understand immediately. So an example of this is Nest. So when they first launched into the thermostat market, they had a whole staff of people that were writing white papers on energy savings. And it was really important to them to be the cognitive referent, or like we think of facial tissues and Kleenex, like people just say Kleenex to say facial tissue. Nest wanted to be that for eco-friendly homes, essentially. And they did all kinds of scientific research about how their product would be useful in the homes of the future and saving energy. So to you all, I would say, try to be thought leaders in whatever it is that you're doing. If you can start a blog, if you can start a newsletter, become the cognitive referent for whatever your new market is, so that other people in your industry start saying, oh, hey, these guys really know what they're talking about. I should read the information that they're putting out there for all of us to read. A second point here is converting competitors into collaborators. There are several ways you can do this: revenue sharing, equity investment, anti-leader positioning. So what this means is, let's say that you're entering a new market. There may be some big established players that are operating in an adjacent market. How do you keep those big established players from moving in and squashing you, basically? Well, this is one way. You can start a revenue sharing agreement with them, and you can demarcate very clearly what the organizational boundaries of your firm are. And you can say, we operate in this space, and we're going to use this other firm as a supplier, potentially. A great example of, well, before I go to the next slide, anti-leader positioning. You see this happening now, actually, with like Lyft and other ride-sharing platforms that are all combining their efforts against Uber. Like the Chinese version of ride-sharing is allied with Lyft, and a bunch of other ride-sharing startups in the US are doing that as well. But this is a really good, well-known example of this. Back at Macworld, back in the 80s, when Apple was really having trouble, Microsoft famously made a $150 million investment into Apple. What was the reason behind that? Well, from Microsoft's perspective, they would be able to sell more software if there were more computers out there. And from Apple's perspective, if they had useful software on their laptops and on their products, then more people were likely to buy them and use them. So it was kind of a win-win situation where they both gave tacit agreement for that the other one would exist, which was huge, actually, in Apple's continued success. Thirdly, so this is a little bit later stage, probably doesn't concern many of you at this point. I doubt that you're considering like acquiring your competitors at this point, but take this, file it away for future reference at some point. These are some good reasons to think about acquiring your competitors. One, to eliminate competing models. Second, to increase market coverage. And third, to block competitor entry. So like we were talking about a second ago, If there's a large established competitor operating in an adjacent industry, you can remove the stepping stones to your new market by acquiring some of your other smaller startup competitors. A good example of this just happened this year actually with Slack. So Slack has made another acquisition to add more functionality to its platform and position itself as a sharper competitor against the likes of Microsoft. Let's read between the lines here. No, what they're actually doing is they're acquiring this company, Screen Hero, so that Microsoft can't acquire that company and then become a direct competitor to Slack. A similar thing happened when Facebook acquired WhatsApp. Facebook's main rationale for that was to not let Google or Apple buy WhatsApp. So yeah. These soft power tactics of illusion and exploitation and timing are key for you. These are tools for your tool set. Write these down, think about them. Why does this matter? So I love this, the with them. For me, whenever you're talking about talking to an external stakeholder, I encourage all of you to put whatever it is that you're going to say through this filter of with them, which means what's in it for me. Again, cognitive bias, we have a bias, all of us, to approach any problem from our perspective. So this means put yourself in the other person's shoes. If you're selling to someone else, think for a second, like, why would this guy want what I'm selling? And I need to make it super clear why that's important. And so this is why. This was essential. I mentioned that framework that I just presented was the result of a Stanford and INSEAD professor, and this was the conclusion of that paper, which is that over time, startups that claim to demarcate and control their position in a market are more likely to sustain near monopoly positions in fully constructed markets. A little bit academic, but Einstein says it's good. So, takeaway, where are you on this continuum? Are you pushing into a new market? Are you being pulled into a new market? A bit of advice, if you feel that you're pushing into a new market, do everything that you can to validate the demand of your market. So validate the need, validate the willingness to pay, do this by moving yourself towards pull on that continuum by doing lots of rapid testing, getting as much feedback as you can from your early customers. And if you're being pulled into a market, build it again and better, because you can always build your product again in a way that's more aligned with what your users need. So that's it. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Blake. In one of your last slides, you talk about having your competitors take an equity stake in your company. So we're starting a fintech firm, and our competitors are very big banks. So how do you see that? Does that make sense to you to have the banking system finance fintechs, or should we try and stay independent?
So yeah, that falls under demarcating your organizational boundaries. So it depends on what the investment rationale of the bank is in you. If you feel like they're investing in you because they know that things are changing and they know that they're not ideally placed to capture those changes, but they want to have some kind of a role in those changes, then I'd say that could be interesting to you. And there are likely some resources that the bank would be able to offer you along with its investment that would help you gain additional market share. Potentially access to some of their customer base. I don't know exactly what your fintech startup does, but yeah, it could be helpful in delineating to the overall market, like, hey, this is the space that we play in. And we have this external validation from this big player who has given tacit acknowledgement to the fact that we're here and we're here to stay. So it's a nice signal to the market. N'hésitez pas à poser vos questions. Ici, on dit que les accents sont très cute. Qu'est-ce qu'on dit? Très, très cute. Yes.
Hi. I have a question. I thought you would talk a little bit about patents when you're going into a new market. I recognize that if you're going into a different country, it's pretty hard to protect your patents unless you go through that legal system. So I wanted to take your feedback on that.
Patents. So we had IP on the Vapor Communications startup. And just to make sure I fully understand your question, so your question is, are patents... So this is kind of a tough one. The good news is oftentimes patents are enforceable and valid across territories, right? If you have a patent that's in the US, it's usually respected in Europe. The bad news is if the person that's violating your patent has deeper pockets than you, especially in the United States with the US legal system, good luck fighting them on it. So typically I would say patents are a useful way to raise money. Investors are very interested in patents, but if a competitor decides that they want to copy what you're doing and you're a startup and they have deeper pockets than you, I wouldn't count on your patents as being a viable way to them blocking them entering your market. Does that make sense?
Hello. Now everybody knows about Airbnb, but in the early day, Airbnb somehow they hack in Craigslist system and they receive like 1,000 and 100,000 of email and they create fake account in order to attract user to their Airbnb system. So what's your opinion about that? Is it a...
Let's see. My main comment on Airbnb actually has to do with timing. So I think Airbnb is an amazing idea, and it was famously passed up by some top tier VCs in Silicon Valley. And I think that they came about at just the right time in the marketplace, right? So I don't know if you've heard of couch surfing or if that was even like a thing over here, but in the States it was a big thing. So the idea of letting people that you don't know, strangers, just come and stay at your house, that actually had already been validated before Airbnb came around. The thing that Airbnb didn't know was, are people willing to pay for this or not? So in terms of demand validation, Airbnb came to that new market with half of its demand validated already. That's the key thing for me in relation to this talk about Airbnb. As to scraping and kind of marketing tactics, that's not really my area of expertise, so I'll defer to you on that.
Hi, Blake.
Sorry. I was quite interested in your phone device. And my experience in the construction of aromas is it's something that's quite technical. So I wondered, how can you, how did you operators try to construct an aroma? Because sometimes they're very complicated. And technically, how did you achieve that?
Let's see. I'm happy to answer that maybe offline with you,
Okay,
if that's okay.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. There is something about launching a new market or a new category that I would like you to talk about a little bit is regarding distribution. When you launch a new category, so you go and see the distribution of the closed categories. And as you launch the product, your cost of goods is pretty higher than competitors, than existing alternatives. And you have another challenge to convince the distribution to get to earn less money on your products as they are earning on existing ones. So that's a second challenge, which is, according to my experience, much more difficult than to convince consumers. And consumers.
It is. So going back to claim demarcate control again. So distribution is another one that falls neatly under demarcate. So this gentleman here was asking about an equity investment. Revenue sharing is another thing that you can use to align the positions of adjacent stakeholders in your value chain. And distribution is just downstream from you, so it makes sense potentially if you're launching in a new market, look at someone who could be a big distributor from you, try to find a few of them actually, get them to compete against each other for your business. If they'll maybe make an equity investment in you, sometimes that's a difficult thing, but oftentimes doing a revenue sharing agreement is a possibility in that case. And then it clearly delineates, this is where what we do stops. We don't distribute our own product, we work with other companies that distribute our product, but our values are aligned essentially because we share the revenues, right? Our incentives are aligned, that's what I'm trying to say.
Hi, I have a question about claiming leadership on the market, existing market with very big players, and where you offer something new, a new way to do something. how can you exist with big players doing the old way, and you offer something new to big clients that maybe would not consider your offer because you're too small?
So you're talking about launching a new product, but in an established market.
Yeah.
So that means that your work is really cut out for you. You have to be better, faster, cheaper than everything else that's out there. And the value proposition that you need to offer just has to be better based on speed, based on quality, based on efficiency than everything else that's out there in the market. Did I answer your question?
Well,
what?
It seems easy.
It seems easy, but yeah, I don't know the particulars of your business, but what, do you want to go into more detail?
That's it all. We help businesses get their mobile solution without any programming. So you can, they can get their own custom mobile solution connected to their information system, databases, Oracle, DB2, etc., directories, Active Directory, etc., without any programming. So it's quite fast. It just takes some hours to some days instead of some weeks or months. And you have a native mobile interface, integrated security, etc.
Okay.
And
so,
and our competitors are the big players that offer services about developing mobile solutions.
okay, so there's a few elements of what I talked about that sound like they could be relevant. Anti-leader positioning, if you could ally with other small firms that are also competing against larger players in the space. You need to be better, faster, and cheaper than what the big guys are doing. You also should look at the way that you market your product. So how are you claiming leadership in the space? Are you giving before you're asking back? Are you writing newsletters and papers that other people see you as the cognitive referent, as the go-to guys for having the best stuff in this space? Those are all questions to be asking. So, yeah. Without really sitting down and diving in, I don't know how much more detail I can really give you here. But
okay, thank you.
Quick one. You said fake it until you make it. Are you pushing us to lie to our prospects?
No, this is a good question. So, Americans usually have an easier time with this, actually. Whenever you're inventing something new, before it exists, you could either see this as a lie. You could say, like, we're inventing a new way to do aromatic communication. Well, on the day that I say that, is it actually true? Does it actually work that very day? No, probably not. I probably have a prototype, and I'm going out and working with my engineers to, like, tweak it and make it work. Does that mean I'm lying? I don't know, that's a moral judgment for you all to make, but essentially every company that's been creating something new at some point in their history has done this, where you have to say, this is what we're trying to achieve, we may be here, but if X, Y, and Z line up, then we'll get there. And if you're not thinking in that kind of a step change way, then I don't see how change happens, so.
Hello. Have you considered your O-phone for aromatherapy / complementary medicine applications?
So yeah, from my most recent conversation with the guys on the team, they were saying it's actually being used in Alzheimer's research now. So among the 5 senses, scent is the only one that is directly connected to the brain or the neofrontal cortex or something. I'm not a neurosurgeon. But it's the sense that's most closely linked with memory, actually. So hence its relevance in treating Alzheimer's. So the idea is to create some kind of an application where folks that are at the onset stage of Alzheimer's can be training themselves with images and with sense to help prevent them from lapsing into Alzheimer's. So that's actually under trial right now. And beyond aromatherapy, so I'm not familiar with complementary medicine and.
That's basically, Western medicine
Okay.
together with alternative medicines, which is like aromatherapy, etc.
Yeah, we did actually have some chats with some aromatherapy people. The difficulty with having a hardware product especially is any one of these applications, because we also were talking with car companies, we were talking with entertainment companies, we were talking with tech companies. Every one of these, if we were to design the perfect product for a specific usage, would have resulted in a hardware product that looked completely different. So we had to focus, especially at the outset, on building something that was beautiful and something that worked in enough applications that we could validate a few different hypotheses or invalidate a few hypotheses. And aromatherapy could work, and I think we did actually do a test with an aromatherapist in the US with the device. So yeah, it's an interesting, after that the question is how big is the market and does it warrant its own specific design of the hardware that goes along just for that use case? Yeah.
I have a question about your presentation video of the O phone. I have to say I was a bit surprised by the use case you presented, saying that anyone can send a cent to their friend, but doesn't that rely on their ability to decompose any cent into the base note, the heart notes, the head notes, and I think most people are totally unable to do that, just like most people are unable to rewrite a song by ear, note by note. And I was wondering if that was not limiting yourself and putting an upper limit on your potential market.
So it's a fair question. The interesting thing that we learned from doing this was the marketing value of deconstruction of aromas for big companies that communicate using aroma. So we had a lot of interest by like L'Oreal and Starbucks, for example, that wanted to educate their consumers on why Colombian coffee is so much different than Rwandan coffee, which to your point, a lot of consumers on an everyday basis would not necessarily be able to distinguish those notes. So what you present as a challenge on the business side, actually, it's an opportunity to educate a market and to drive value, actually. And that's actually the second pivot that we made after this, was to focus more on B2B applications, B2B2C applications, where large companies that communicate in a multisensorial way would have a third sense that they could communicate with beyond audiovisual. Does that make sense? Good question.
Hi. I'm kind of stuck between the push-pull approach, and I have this question. What's, according to you, the new formula between educating and playing to validate the market?
What's the difference between educating and playing?
Not the difference, but what the formula to, at the same time, educate and play, like find the right equation, formula to validate the market.
Okay, so I guess that kind of depends on the product. The O-phone was a product that lends itself very well to play and to discovery, I guess you could say. Not all products can use play as a venue to get real actionable insights about product market fit. But going back to the O-phone again, another application that is happening right now in New York City, they have iPads set up at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York, with the story of Winnie the Pooh, and it's like a children's book, and you can smell in the book as you go through, the honey and the bees and the forest and whatever else. And so in that sense, it is a very playful application of the technology, and we're learning a lot about how kids interact with that new technology. And kids, what's great about kids is that they play and they're always open to discovering new things, and they don't have a lot of these biases against new products or the same skepticism that we as adults bring to new products. So especially in marketing products to kids, I think play can be a really important venue for getting actionable insights. So yeah.
I just wanted to bounce back on what you said in response to an earlier question about the fact that you were trying to make a beautiful product with the O-phone. I'm a bit surprised. If you're trying to discover a new market, is the priority designing something beautiful? You know, at least in the States, early adopters typically will be quite forgiving with, you know, the beauty of a product. So was it for credibility or?
Yeah, so I think people are a lot more likely to you're a lot more likely to get viral effects if your product is interesting to look at. One thing I didn't mention, but we got like a ton of press coverage in the US, and part of that is a function of the fact that it's like, oh, it's a Harvard University professor that came up with this idea, and that was partly due to it, but it was also partly because the product looked kind of cool and novel and interesting, and I don't know if it would have had the same effect and like people sharing it on Facebook and stuff. It was just like a bunch of wires kind of sticking out of a prototype thing. But yeah, I mean, especially in things that are less B2C, if it's really meant for like a niche market of like coders or hardcore technical people, yeah, like building it beautiful is not necessarily the first priority. But when you're trying to, here's the key thing, when you don't know who your market is, you don't want the fact that your product is ugly to detract like some potential users from even looking at it. So, I mean, we weren't trying to design like the most beautiful product you've ever seen in the world. We were trying to design something that would be nice enough looking that it wouldn't turn anybody off, let's say, and that it could be usable in a lot of different use cases. So to kind of keep our options open and see what we learned when we exposed the product to the market. Does that make sense?
I don't want to hog the conversation, but if you think of a web platform, you can fake it until you make it. And that's what we're trying to figure out now, especially in the French market. Do we make it look pretty and do nothing, or do we spend less time on design and actually build some more functionality? That was the thought process.
Okay, well, first of all, when I say fake it till you make it, what I mean is in the sense of claiming the market and becoming the cognitive referent for your market. It's not about fake it till you make it by building something that's beautiful but doesn't work. Like, if you're faking it till you're making it, what that means is that you're going out and you're signaling leadership in your new market, and there's something real and concrete behind that. So whether you have something that's beautiful or ugly, like the important thing at that stage is that it works and that you're getting customers and have growth going on behind the scenes. Yeah. Cool. Is that it? All right, I'll be around afterwards if you want to ask me more questions. Thanks for coming.